this section of the training videos, we will be looking at WCP3, which is the constraints section of the EWCO application form. And essentially what this section of the form is looking to do is to undertake a desk survey to identify the potential factors that could impact the woodland creation proposal, or that could be impacted by the woodland creation proposal. It's a really important step in the application form because it not only helps to inform your design, but it also helps to engage stakeholders and recognise organisations that might be affected by this woodland creation proposal. So the breakdown of the form is that it will be looking for a desk survey undertaken on the LIS Forestry Commission map browser or on Magic, and the idea is for the form to indicate the constraints that are present by selecting yes or no on whether they're present on site or whether they're present adjacent to site. The designation details, so what the designation is, the name of the designation, maybe a reference or possibly even a name of some correspondence or correspondence with someone who is the legal overseer of that designation. Final step of the form is the mitigation planning, so outlining how each constraint will be mitigated within, or is mitigated within, your woodland creation design proposal. What we're looking for in the first section of the designations, or within the constraints, are those designated sites. So the list of designated sites for the form includes the SSIs, sites of special scientific interest, national parks, the Norfolk Broads, which is mapped as a national park, but that's very site specific, World Heritage Sites, scheduled monuments, areas of outstanding natural beauty, special areas of conservation, special protection areas, Ramsar sites, national nature reserves, and local nature reserves, including local wildlife sites. So that can include sites of importance for nature conservation, so SINCs, and sites of nature conservation importance, so SNCIs, and can also include county wildlife sites. So what you'll be looking to do is you'll be looking to do a desk survey using the Forestry Commission map browser on the screen here. And the way to find these designated sites is by going on the constraints section, going on the drop down there. You'll then be looking to highlight each one of the designated sites. Ramsar sites, special areas of conservation, special protection areas, World Heritage Sites, areas of outstanding natural beauty, which are now called national landscapes, national parks, sites of special scientific interest, national nature reserves, local nature reserves, scheduled monuments, and then once those are all highlighted, they should appear on the map. And it's always worth zooming out ever so slightly, especially with SSIs and SBAs and SACs, as they usually cover quite large areas, and it's worth considering impact risk zones of SSIs. So just being within an impact risk zone or close to a SSI is worth considering. So once that's all highlighted, gives you an indication of what designated site constraints you've got nearby. So these designated sites are specifically classified and usually have some regulatory implications and guidelines that will need to be considered in a woodland creation proposal. And understanding and adhering to these designations ensures UKFS and EIA compliance. So these are really important in this section of the form. So once these are highlighted, it's always worth clicking to detail which designated site is nearby. So in this case, it's the High Weald National Landscape or Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So that is that first list of constraints in the EWCO form. And as detailed earlier, you'll be clicking yes or no as to whether they're on site, adjacent to site, and then detailing the name of the designation and the mitigation you'll be following to consider that in your design. So in this case, looking up the High Weald stance on woodland creation and then understanding how that can fit into your woodland creation proposal. So the next constraint that will be detailed in the form, listed under the other constraints section, is the low risk areas for woodland creation. So this part of the form follows a similar structure, but is slightly more simplistic, that it's a yes or no as to whether it's present on the site, and then some comments next to the yes or no. So for this first other constraints, we're looking for low risk areas for woodland creation. To find this, we'll go on targeting and scoring. So we'll go back onto our site, targeting and scoring, scrolling right down and finding low risk areas for woodland creation. Switching that on. So these yellow areas indicate areas that are considered low sensitivity to woodland creation, so unlikely to be impacted. The absence of yellow, however, does not necessarily mean that it's a no to woodland creation. It just means that there's likely to be more constraints. So in this case, the absence of yellow is indicated probably by the presence of the high weald national landscape. But the converse is also the same, that this low risk doesn't necessarily indicate that woodland will be a definite here. It just means it's less sensitive. And it's always worth speaking to your woodland officer about this, as they're likely to have more information on what's nearby and can speak to our area advisor team. So if we switch that off. So the next constraint in the WCO form is considering the impact this proposal will have on wild birds, areas and the diversity of habitats for wild birds nearby. Same as before, it's the yes or no and then some comments. You're looking to go into wader zonal map, going on this drop down and clicking on all of these. Now when the information comes up, it obviously looks quite confusing. It's lots of numbers, lots of names. So this gives a score which indicates whether these birds will be on site. It's always worth zooming out as well, as it makes it slightly less daunting. So the score works, indicates whether the birds will be on site, 1 being a low chance, 5 being a high chance of the birds being on site. So in this case, 1 low, pretty low chance of them being there. But if you're unsure, it's always worth getting in contact with RSPB, as they will likely have more information on the presence of wading birds in that area. So if it's a higher number, or a 4 or 5, maybe worth getting involved with the RSPB just to really get an idea of how suitable that habitat is. Or if unsure, speak to your woodland officer, and I'm sure they'll be able to signpost you in the right direction. So the next section in the form is understanding the good practice to safeguard European protected species. So in the form, it asks whether you are aware of the good practice to safeguard European protected species during forestry operations to obtain a licence if you cannot comply with the good practice. So the form gives you a hyperlink which sends you towards that good practice guidance. So it's worth reading through that and understanding whether you will need an EPS or European Protected Species licence during your forestry operations. Once again, it's always good to speak to your woodland officer, as I'm sure that they can signpost you in the right direction or give you any relevant information you might need. Section of the form involves another good practice. So are you aware of the good practice to safeguard badgers during forestry operations and the need to obtain a licence? So as with the last section, so on the European protected species, there's another hyperlink which sends you towards that good practice guidance. It's worth familiarising yourself with that, understanding it, and then you can tick yes. And as I say, if there's any unsurety, it is worth speaking to your woodland officer, as I'm sure they can inform you, or at the very least they can signpost you in the right direction. So the next section in the form, or the next constraint in the form, is the woodland being created in the catchment of a water body which has a designation. So woodland creation can influence sort of hydrological processes within a catchment that can affect water infiltration, runoff rates, and sedimentation, so sort of sediment filtering into water bodies. So in this case, looking at this water body just here. So understanding whether there is a sensitive catchment nearby, so one that is designated as an SAC or a SPA or another designated site is vital. And if you think you have identified an area that has a water catchment, it would be then that you would contact Natural England, possibly a catchment sensitive farming officer, possibly the EA. But it's worth putting that in the form and understanding what mitigation you may be needing to put in and the possible routes you need to take to speak to relevant stakeholders, so Natural England or the Environment Agency. And then the final constraint that is in this section of the form is, have you undertaken a wildfire risk assessment? And can you demonstrate effective control measures to protect new existing forests, woodlands and other surrounding land uses? So obviously in the current climate, wildfire risk is constantly increasing, and woodland creation proposals are included within that risk. So understanding what risk there could be to your project is vital, and it's worth speaking to your woodland officer about how to look into this. And obviously there is a hyperlink to a bit of guidance and understanding how to build resilience to wildfires into your project. So it's worth following that and getting in a better understanding. So for much larger scale projects, a much sort of more in-depth risk assessment is going to be needed. So ticking yes, and then adding a comment about what sort of risk assessment you'll be undertaking or have undertaken for your woodland creation proposal.